Okay. Alright, so we're gonna go back to last we left. Oh man. I really have to fix these paintbrushes. Like immediately. I don't know if you can see, but my brush, I made this rack for all my paints. My paints are still kind of a mess, but I made it to organize them. And it was sitting over here, so I had all my brushes right here in reach because I'm a lefty. I had to stream, I had to move it to the other side. And in moving it to the other side, the brushes are on the far end. They're incredibly hard to reach. Anyway. Alright, so last time we did this shading, which looks so much better now that we did it with our own custom shade and not the Agrax Earth shade that was turning it glossy. We're going to do a couple of highlights today, I think, after we finish the shading. I think this came out really good on the back. I really like that. Very happy with it. What we still need to shade is this arm. You can see how much brighter the arm is. I'm gonna get that shaded in. And we have to shade this arm. This loose arm that's not connected yet. And then we're gonna add some highlights and see where we are time-wise to see what else we might have to be able to do, or what we might not be able to do. Our paint got pretty dry. We're gonna moisten it back up, especially since we're shading. We want it to be really thin. I'm just dipping my brush in water and kind of soaking the wet palette where the paint is, so it'll be like a super thin mixture. Then we're going to go in here and add some shade. And this is probably too heavy, so we still want to thin it out more. Come in with just like some pure water and clean this up a little bit. A little too much. There we go. I don't know if that's in frame. It looks like it kind of is. The best I can do. All right. Work on all of these shaded areas, and also kind of the edges where they're dirty, where it's dirty and grimy. Down by the wrist, I feel like pretty nasty, right? Reaching for shit, grabbing things, being a disgusting ogre. Kind of like me whenever I'm eating. Just being a total monster. Unnecessarily. Okay. I'm gonna add a little bit more pigment in around the edges here. Yeah, I'm mostly in frame. I don't know if it's totally seeable, but we're doing our best. Kind of dirty up the edges of this a little bit. Not too much. We don't want to lose all of our red. We definitely want the definitely want it to look like well worn. good. And then same thing for this arm. Oh, I have to hold it up. Same thing for this arm. Really land in those shadows pretty heavily. Give it a very... Just give it a lot of contrast. And it'll be even more noticeable and contrasty. Contrasty. When I come back in with highlights in a minute. And make it pop back out. In the spots where maybe it didn't get so dirty, or the light is hitting it properly, making it shine. Kind of really dirty this up. I think one of the things that I do wrong the most is I don't add enough high contrast. I really like the low contrast, and I end up making these like sort of really realistic-y, grimy looking figures. But then I think I don't bring up the highs enough. And the effects of that end up showing in that my contrast, while it looks fairly realistic in terms of colors, it doesn't really like, a lot of times my painting won't, it doesn't seem to like catch your eye the way that I want it to. Or the way that I envisioned it when I was painting it. And I think I need to be a little bit more cognizant of bringing the high highlights up to match the low highlights that I bring it down. And understand that even if it's a little bit cartoony and isn't 100% real, I'm doing it with a purpose. That the purpose isn't to make it the most dirty painting that's ever existed. The purpose is to make it an eye-catching, really cool-looking figure. So that's what we're gonna do with this red, with these highlights. I don't know if I have enough red to do the highlights, but just try and add. I don't know if you can see that, but just in certain areas, adding a little bit more of just like the brightest red we've used, just to kind of say, hey, I know this is dirty, but you know, we want it to look cool. Yeah, a little more paint. This is coming off a little too thin. This is yesterday's red that I'm highlighting with, which is not doing me any favors. Things like this area right here, along there. Just these little lines to help it stand out. Yeah, I think it's giving it more of a already little touches like that are making it a lot brighter. Definitely pulling my eye more. We'll have to decide later if I did too much, but for now we're gonna err on too much highlight because I've always erred on too little highlight before, and I want to go try the opposite this time. All right. And keep in mind that also the highlights that I'm making now are going to seem super bright. But they will fade. So even though right now it probably looks even more wild, we'll dry darker. Than they are at this exact moment. And while that makes it really hard sometimes to know how much highlight to put in, you just kind of have to go step by step until you learn. I have not fully learned, fully acknowledged that. I'm still learning a lot. A lot I don't know. A lot I have yet to learn. But one of the things I've learned is if I just go slow enough, a little bit here, let it dry, a little bit more, let it dry, a little bit more, let it dry, that eventually I'll get there. I might not be good enough to be able to first time, knock it out of the park, but that's okay. I think that's already looking really cool. There's tons of contrast there, and it sticks out a lot more than I did before. Sans highlights. I'm just trying to make it so that maybe where the light would hit it, or maybe in some places where even a dirty red cloth is still gonna come off as pretty red in some areas. And I want to capture that. Again, even at the expense of maybe going a little bit overboard, making it more red than it would be. Because like I said, I always go the other way, and I always regret it. So this time, if we're gonna regret it, we're gonna regret it for going too bright. Not bright enough. Decision I made when I started this guy, and I'm gonna stick to that decision, ride or die. And I mean, the other reality is, like, after you've shaded something a whole bunch of times and gotten the exact shade you want, it can be way harder, I think, to go in and add highlights than it is to put a lot of highlights in and go back and shade over it. And it's part of the reason that I haven't fixed it in the past, when I've been a little disappointed that it's not as bright as I wanted it to be. So I think I've looked at it and I've gone, man, these like multi-layer, like 3-layer shades that I put in, like, I can't just throw a highlight over it and pretend like nothing ever happened. It's just not going to come out right. So, so here I am doing the opposite. And I'm really happy with this, I think. It's still wet. The light's really bright on it, but I think it's looking good. And we're just going to do this to all the red on these clothes and kind of see how it looks after it's dried. And then make our decision going forward about maybe the rest of the model. But so far, I have to say I'm pleased. All right. I do have to remind myself that even though we're going overboard, as opposed to underboard, some of it is just allowed to be darker. I shouldn't be afraid of leaving some squares just pretty dark. Some patches. I don't want to go so overboard that I end up doing a ton of touching up later. I have to reshade this thing all over again. But even though I say that, this is coming out, I think, how I want it. So, well, fingers crossed. No jinx kind of thing. At this current juncture, is looking the way I kind of imagined it looking right now. So, can't complain about that. I think at my level of painting, which is slightly more than beginner, but definitely not advanced, one of the biggest things I'm usually going for is just to make it look the way that I see in my head. And if I could always do that, I'd be really happy. And the truth is, I just can't always do that. Sometimes I'm really successful at it. Sometimes I'm significantly less so. Just kind of trying to add a little bit more pigment in there. I also want to make sure, the other thing that I'm kind of seeing here that I want to make sure I avoid. I am avoiding it a little bit, but just to voice it. Also want to make sure this doesn't turn into like just red and brown are the two colors. I want it to have multiple shades here. I did a lot of work in like having fairly complex shading gradient. For me, I don't want to act like this is what I did is something amazing, but for me, I did a fairly complex shading gradient, and I don't want to add so much depth, so much dark, and then so much light, that it ends up just looking like bright red and then dark brown. I feel like that would be counter to what I'm really trying to do here. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. We can move to, I guess while we're doing red, we can highlight all of these little pieces on his red pieces on his waist. These are less dark, so I think there's less to do. These also probably don't have the same they don't need to sort of stand out the same way that the leg guards do, as they're just kind of clothing. It's okay for them to be a little more drab and in the background. But out of good measure, since we're taking so much time to make this look as nice as we can, we ought to take it seriously and do what we can, where we can, to help it look good. Again, always being cognizant that you don't want to go too bright, kind of like we just probably did there. But we can shade over that a little bit if it needs it. I forgot about this piece that I barely had any red left when I was painting it. It's good to be able to get back to that. Okay, did that. Now we'll do the arm. We'll do the other arm, and we'll stop and evaluate as things start to dry. Well, it's hard because, frankly, this arm is underneath his body and actually legitimately in the shadows. So we don't want to highlight this too much. Maybe this back part more, because there'd be more ambient light hitting this part of his arm. Definitely these upper edges facing where the sun would be. Up here, get some good reds. Maybe right on the wrists a little bit. Still, we don't want to be super saturated on any of this, given that it's not gonna be super seen. So that looks good though. I think made it pop a little bit more. This could use probably just a tiny bit. Stand out just a little bit. There we go. All right, so we got all of those. We have this loose arm. Move this to the side, and again, this part down here is below him, so I don't want to go crazy. Adding some little highlights just to reinforce that this was or is supposed to be a bright red piece. But then up here we're really dealing with stuff that is super visible. It's gonna have a lot of light. You have no reason not to play up on how bright this could be. Really give it some contrast. These little details are hard and also frustrating because it's very easy for these little tiny pieces that like stick out between the leather to not be sort of painted over later when I'm doing other pieces. Like, so when I start doing these ropes and these leather bits, be really careful because when you start touching the little pieces in between, I don't know if you can see them, just like the little there's little slivers. Once you touch them, you have to like redo the whole thing again. It gets really frustrating. All right, I think that's pretty good for highlights. Sorry, what I'm doing right now is not on camera at all, but I just wanted to touch something really quick. All right. Now, if we're being honest, which hopefully we're trying to be, I don't know that we want to add highlights to the yellow like we did with the red. Because yellow highlights are going to be very yellow. Red is a little bit different. Yellow, I feel like, don't get away with as much. And it's already bright. And also the brown, I don't know how we would highlight that. Maybe we do. Maybe we just do it. But if you take an overall look, I think it's looking pretty good. I think one of the things we need to do is touch up areas where we fucked up the skin. You can see his belly, we got a little yellow. Around his ankles, there's a couple of spots, like down here, where we got some red on his ankle. Some red on this ankle. These are important things. Under here, yeah, you can see the brown spot. Back here, we have a little red. We could touch up his skin tone, or we could start moving on to like these patches, which are also super important. So maybe next, that's what we'll be doing. But I think for now, we're gonna call it. Make that a little standout session on its own. Let it fully dry so we can look at it in the light of day tomorrow. Fully dried, fully highlighted, and make our decision as to where we want to go from there. Maybe we add some highlights in. Can't see that as much. But in here, maybe we highlight like these edges for the brown. Maybe we do a little bit of yellow highlights. I think one of the next things I want to do though is to really finish the ankle guards. And that would be to do all of these ropes. There's ropes and leather pieces. There's this iron thing or a bell or whatever it is around his ankle. It looks like maybe a copper bell. Leather strap holding this together here across the top. The little tassel. And of course the stitching. I have to decide what I'm going to do with the stitching. The stitching between every one of these pieces. There's stitching everywhere. In here, all of this stitching. So I'm not sure what colors I'm going to go with those, but for now, I think that we might do those, or at least base coat them next time. I think that would give it less of a amorphous blob look. Instead of all this brown in there, you'd see. I plan on making the rope sort of like this color at the brightest, like a screaming skull. This looks even brighter than it is right now under this camera. It's more of a, it's much yellower than this white napkin. So you can see the paper towel. You can see that. I also go with like a wraith bone. A little bit, that's a little bit brighter. I don't know that I want to go that white. But I was thinking of maybe going the same screaming skull, not just for the ropes, but also the stitching. I guess I'll have to make that decision tomorrow. There's a lot more ropes in here. What looks like maybe twisted metal. I wish I could get a little more zoomed in. But here is obviously, like this is obviously a piece of rope. And this is rope, and this is rope. Is this rope? Yeah, this is like twine-ish rope. This is rope. So how am I going to define these? That's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. What pieces are going to be leather? What pieces are going to be rope? So once I get all the stitching and the rope and the highlights in for this, we can actually fix this in here, touch up the skin tone, and then move on to even more fun details. Working on these shields on his arm, which I'm super excited to do. This whole weapon in general still needs to be done. You can see I started a little bit just to get a sort of feel for what it might look like. But these chains are really cool and they look really awesome. And he's still got more pieces to go too that just aren't even glued on. And not to mention all of these various weapons and trinkets hanging off of him. So there's still a bunch to do here. But we have to get the highlights done, the ropes and leather straps done, and then also decide what I'm going to do with this. I don't think I like it red. I like the scales red, but I think I want this to be more like a tooth or a horn. So I might have to repaint that. And then get this affixed. I think that's really my goal right now, is to be able to get this on and call it good, because I think that's going to be a really big enhancement to the character. It's obviously a big part of his like centerpiece. I spent a lot of time painting the metal shields in different colors. So, all right, that is what it is, and we shall call it there. So, okay. Thanks, guys, for hanging out, for coming in, saying hi, talking about chess, talking about painting, and we'll do it again soon. Sorry it was kind of a short stream, but I gotta get off to work, and I will catch you all later.